The summit on Wednesday with North Korea, Vice President Pence just said a few weeks ago, quote, "We still await concrete steps by North Korea to dismantle the nuclear weapons." Researchers at Stanford University, as you know, estimate that North Korea added about 7 nuclear weapons last year. What does North Korea need to do at this summit? What do they need to pledge to do for you to consider it a success?
You have to go back to where we entered this in the Trump administration to think about the path forward. We've always known this would take time and it would be a step forward and slower than the world has demanded, right? This is a UN Security Council resolution that we're attempting to achieve by getting North Korea fully denuclearized. We started when the Obama administration had a policy which was essentially test, pray, and cower, right? Let them test missiles, let them test nuclear weapons, pray they stop, and cower when the North Koreans made a threat.
Well, they did sanction also.
Not remotely what this administration has done. And they didn't build out a coalition, an enormous global coalition we built out through the United Nations to put that pressure in place to allow us to begin to have what have been real negotiations over the past now 6 or 7 months. I am hopeful that when President Trump and Chairman Kim get together, they'll make a big step towards realizing what Chairman Kim promised. He promised he'd denuclearize. We hope he'll make a big step towards that in the week ahead.
So what would a big step be? What's the kind of pledge that they need to do? I mean, last summit, it was nice, and the remains of U.S. Service members were brought back to the United States, but there wasn't any concrete step in terms of denuclearization.
I concur. Look, we've got work to do on the denuclearization pillar. We got remains back. We've had testing stop. Those are all good things. Tension along the border is reduced. If you ask the military leaders, frankly, on both sides, from South Korea and North Korea, tensions are reduced. There are many things he could do to demonstrate his commitment to denuclearization. Our negotiating team was on the ground the last 3 days, and they'll be on the ground again today. I'll be there tomorrow to continue these discussions. I don't want to get into the details of what's being proposed, what the offers and counteroffers may be, but a real step, a demonstrable, verifiable step is something that I know President Trump is very focused on achieving.
So tensions in the peninsula have alleviated, but your successor as CIA Director, Gina Haspel, told Congress last month that North Korea is, quote, committed to developing a long-range nuclear-armed missile that would pose a direct threat to the United States. Now, President Trump, after the last summit, said, he tweeted, quote, there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Does he still believe there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea, even though Gina Haspel, the CIA Director, says North Korea is committed to creating this missile to hit the United States?
Look, having been the CIA Director not too terribly long ago, I'm very familiar with the fact pattern. We do know the history. We know the history of the North Koreans making promises, making commitments, lying, taking American money when President Clinton said, we've got this resolved back in 1994. This administration's not going to do that. We have charted a different path. Frankly, we've been criticized for taking that path, where we work, we negotiate, and then the two people who can actually effectuate the denuclearization of North Korea and a brighter future for the North Korean people will gather for a second time. We have economic sanctions in place. We know the standard for relieving those sanctions. And I'm very hopeful that we'll make a substantial step towards achieving the full denuclearization in a verifiable way in North Korea. The South Koreans, the Japanese have been great partners in this, and we're very hopeful we can get a good outcome.
Do you think North Korea remains a nuclear threat?
Yes.
But the president said he doesn't.
It's not what he said. I mean, I know precisely
he tweeted
what he said.
There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea.
Right. What he said is that what he said was that the efforts that had been made in Singapore, this commitment that Chairman Kim made, have substantially taken down the risk to the American people. It's the mission of the Secretary of State and the President of the United States to keep American people secure. We're aiming to achieve that.
Okay. I mean, that's just a direct quote, but I want to move on. Just a few days ago, you said sanctions against North Korea won't be lifted until, quote, we're confident that we've substantially reduced that risk, the risk of a nuclear attack. But that standard, a substantial reduction of risk, it seems different from what you said just last June. Take a listen.
We're going to get complete denuclearization. Only then will there be relief from the sanctions.
So I guess the question is, has the Trump administration changed the conditions for sanction relief from complete denuclearization, as you said in that clip, to substantial reduction of risk?
No, Jake, there's no change. Remember, these sanctions cover a broad array of activities. The core economic sanctions, the sanctions that prevent countries from conducting trade, creating wealth for North Korea, those sanctions are definitely going to remain in place. There are other things we could do. Exchanges of people, lots of other ways that North Korea is sanctioned today, that if we get a substantial step, move forward, we could certainly provide an outlet which would demonstrate our commitment to the process as well.
So it's kind of a sliding scale. A substantial reduction, some sanctions are relieved, but not all. and then complete denuclearization, more sanctions are relieved. Is that right?
Jake, remember, the core sanctions, the core UN Security Council resolution sanctions, we've said consistently, full, verified denuclearization, that's the standard for relieving those sanctions. That policy has not changed since, I think, since the day President Trump took office.
Take a listen to what the president's director of national intelligence said just last month about the threat from North Korea.
We currently assess that North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities because its leaders ultimately view nuclear weapons as critical to regime survival.
How do you convince Kim to give up something that he thinks is critical to his regime's survival? What is the United States offering that's better than that?
We've made it very plain to Chairman Kim. The alternative to giving up his nuclear weapons is remaining a pariah state, remaining a nation that is unable to trade, unable to grow, unable to take care of its own people. We've made the argument that it would be far better for Chairman Kim himself, his senior leadership, all of the people for North Korea. We've also shared with him that we are happy to make sure that North Korea's security assurances, they're worried about China, that the security assurances that they need can be provided in a way that is reasonable. And we've also told them there'll be real opportunities, that countries from around the world will come, make his economy one that looks more like South Korea's economy than the one that exists in North Korea today. Those are the kinds of things. I've had these conversations. I've been with Chairman Kim, I think, more hours now than anybody, including Dennis Rodman. We've had these conversations now over an extended period. And what Senator Coates, what Director Coates said is the history. And we're hoping to move forward and change that history fundamentally.
North Korea wants the United States to end the declaration of war, of the Korean War. Is that on the table for the summit?
Talked about a lot of things, Jake. I'd just prefer not to get into where the negotiations may stand today.
I want to ask you about Russia, because earlier this month, the United States announced it was pulling out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia. In the wake of that treaty's cancellation, Vladimir Putin this week threatened to respond to any new U.S. missiles in Europe with missiles of its own pointed at the United States. I haven't heard any response from the United States government about that, but that seemed like a fairly a dire threat.
Lots of bluster out of Moscow for sure. I think that bluster is aimed at covering up the core challenge, right? He was talking about America's decision to withdraw from the INF treaty, which covers mid-range, intermediate-range missile systems. The Russians violated that treaty. There were only really two parties to the treaty. The Russians violated. It made no sense for the American people to suffer under the constraints of that treaty, given that the Russians had decided they weren't going to continue to adhere to its constraints. And now it's time to figure out how to move forward, to come up with a solution that the Russians will actually live by. Vladimir Putin chose not to do that. His bluster is aimed at trying to convince the world to drive a wedge between the United States and Europe when everyone's fully on board. The Europeans were fully supportive of our decision, and we will move forward together in ensuring the security of the United States people.
One last question for you, sir. And I know that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is a close ally of President Trump, close ally of yours. You just met with him. Several major Jewish American groups, one's very supportive of Israel, this week condemned Netanyahu for outreach he's conducted to an extreme right-wing, an extremist group, really, a Jewish group, as he is seeking his fifth term in office. The group is called Otzma Yehudit. It has its roots in the racist, radical Kach party that was banned in Israel. It was just called racist and despicable, this party, by AIPAC. Does the Trump administration have any concerns about Netanyahu extending outreach to this racist political party?
Jake, the United States relationships with Israel, we're not about to get involved in an election to interfere in an election of a democracy. Election campaigns are tough. We'll allow the Israeli people to sort this out, and I'm confident that when the election's over, the United States will continue to have a strong, important, very, very deep relationship with Israel that protects the American people and benefits Israel as well.
Is it not the responsibility of an ally of Israel to reach out and say when you think the prime minister is doing something wrong, doing something that violates the values of that relationship and the values of the Jewish state?
This administration's been very vocal when we see human rights violations wherever we find them. Friends, foes, adversaries, allies. We've been very consistent. We do it in different ways. We do it at different times. We will certainly continue to do that. It's a deep, important tradition of the United States of America, and the Trump administration will continue to do that as well, Jake.